Hello, I'm Samuel Thomas. Welcome to Between the Lines, a program designed to take you behind the scenes of how great books become so deeply embedded in our consciousness and become a part of our lives. Today we have a very accomplished writer, Dr. George Knight, the author of 32 books. Welcome, George.
Thank you, Samuel. Good to be here.
I just want to ask you to help us understand why you wrote on the cross of Christ. We have so many books out on the cross and Calvary. Why would you take up that subject again?
Well, you know, there's different perspectives on the cross, and some of them are adequate and some of them are inadequate. And the real problem is, no matter how many books we write on the cross, we'll never really plumb the depth of the meaning of the cross. And maybe part of the problem is we want an explanation. You know, as humans, we like to have everything explained to us. But the cross is not an explanation, it's a demonstration. But still, even though it cannot be completely explained, we can approximate better and better explanations. And I guess I've always wanted to write a book on the cross because it's foundational to the plan of salvation. Now, of course, you're holding in your hand a book called The Cross of Christ. It has a companion called Sin and Salvation, which we published by the Review in 2009. I really started to write a book called Sin and Salvation, dealing with God's grace in our lives, how He saves us from sin and justification, from the power of sin and sanctification. That's what I wanted to do, but I said, wait a minute. There's something before that, and that something is grace. How can God give people what they don't deserve? That really bothered me. How can God just give it away? And in order to understand where I'm coming from, which will kind of shape the book, you have to understand that I was not raised as a Christian. I was an agnostic until I was 19 years of age, and at that time I read the New Testament, and it really made me upset. I mean, you got these, the parable of the prodigal son. You've got this guy who goes out, blows it, runs around with wild women, stoned half the time, until he runs out of money. And then he decides, well, you know, home must be a pretty good place. And he wants to come back, you know, and work his way in, and work his way back up the chain of the family structure. He wants to come back as a hired servant. But the father runs out, throws his arms around him, and gives him what he doesn't deserve. He gives him grace. And that's a beautiful story. But then there's the older son who'd always stayed at home, worked his self all the time. You know, he was calloused, had sheep manure under his fingernails. I mean, this guy had really put out his entire life. And he hears about the forgiveness and the party because the son, and he just blows his top. He won't even go in. You know, there's just some people that hate a party. And I'm going to tell you something. Some of them are in the church.
Yes, yes.
I mean, this guy is really frosted.
Yeah.
Here this guy comes home. And let's face it, when the younger boy went, he took his share of the money.
Yeah.
So the older son's logic is impeccable.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, after all, what else could he do? He was starving to death. He was eating hog food, which is pretty bad news for a Jew. And so what else could he do but come home? And beyond that, he spent his money, now he wants to spend mine. And so when I read this thing, I was upset. The wrong guy gets the reward. But you see, there's something wrong with the older son. He'd always been in the church. He'd always worked on the father's farm, but he really hated every minute of it. He could have said, well, I've kept your stinking commandments, but I really wanted to do what my brother was doing. He just didn't have the guts to do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's one of these church members who can't smile, you know.
But why do you think we don't find any happiness in our relationship with Christ. I mean, you look at this book, the title, The Cross of Christ, God's Work for Us.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we really capture the essence of what God is really doing for us, that he really is in pursuit of us, and we're busy running from him.
Oh, yeah, and he's after everybody. You see, the younger son represents the publicans and the harlots and the nasty sinners.
Yeah.
But you know, Samuel, some of us are what I call vegetarian sinners. We got we're just proud of our goodness.
Right.
We're just good Pharisees.
Yeah.
And so what really bothered me about the story, and this is really where I start the book, I almost put the Bible down because the wrong guy gets rewarded. See, in my human logic, I'm going to give you what you deserve. Cross me, man, you had it. God gives us what we need.
Yes.
But you're right. He comes after us. We respond through his grace and accept the gift. And it is free. And you see, that's not the only story that bothered me. Jesus, I just preached the other night on Matthew 20. And over there in Matthew 20, Jesus hires guys all during the day, right up until the 11th hour, and lines them up backwards to pay them. The guys who get 11 worked 1 hour, they get a whole day's pay. You know what the guys at the back are thinking? Wow, we're going to get 12 days' pay. They get up there, they get 1 day's pay. That's God's grace. He saves us all equally. Anyway, so grace bothered me. On what basis can God forgive? That's what started the book.
What are the reasons that God's grace bothers us? I mean, are we bothered because we grow up in an environment where it says that you don't get unless you put forth effort, that you don't get the A unless you do all of the homework and you do well on the test? Because everything that God does is not based upon any productivity that's on our side.
Yeah.
It's based upon his love and his pursuit of our reclamation. It's really a reclamation process. It's pulling us back in. We don't
Yes.
even know that we belong, to him. Why do we have such a tough time? Because what you're saying is what so many of our viewers have is a tough time.
Well, let me just say this. Human effort in a classroom, which uses an illustration, probably is important.
Rightly
I don't
said.
want any kids watching this program to say, hey, man, this teacher operates on grace. I have to tell my students, man.
Well, I would expect you to say that being a professor, okay? But I'm using the analogy because it's a baseline for most people. It's a fundamental thing that I don't get the raise unless I'm consistent in attendance or consistent in timeliness and getting to my job. I don't, all of these merit processes are very difficult for us.
And of course, in the human realm, like in a classroom or in a job, well, those are things that we can accomplish.
Right.
But what we fail to understand is the depth of the problem of sin, that it has crippled us. It's not just a matter of the will. We are twisted and turned in our nature. Wow. And the only thing that can rescue us, well, let's put it this way, the Bible says we're under the power of sin. And the only thing that can rescue us is the power of God. And God's power is expressed in the biblical language as grace, a Christian word in which God gives people what they don't deserve.